Congressman Darren Soto from Florida's 9th District, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
For starters, can you tell us a little bit about your district and the kinds of agriculture that we might find in it?
Well, if you look to the north of my district in East Orlando, it's tourism and high tech. But as you get further south out of the suburbs, it is cows and oranges as far as the eye can see. I represent the top cattle producing county in the state, Osceola County, home to the largest herd in the nation at Deseret Ranch, 42,000 head of cattle. And then we have citrus country, predominantly in Polk County, but we've been getting hit pretty hard lately with citrus greening and hurricanes, so there's been some challenges.
Mm-hmm. As you represent a district that maybe isn't, maybe folks might not know that Florida's 9th has a lot of agricultural production. How do you bring that attitude to Congress to maybe advocate for not only the fact that there is a lot of agriculture in your district, but also some specialty agriculture in the citrus industry there?
Well, certainly the rural folks are already aware of the large agriculture industry we have, but I tell any of my constituents who live in the suburbs, just drive 5 or 10 miles in any direction and you're going to see cows, oranges, and yes, we have some specialty crops too. Blueberries have been developed by the University of Florida, our land-grant college, and now have been an important part of it. We have a real narrow window, sometime around March, early February, sometimes in April, where we're the only blueberries in the United States. And so hitting that window is a great economic boost for the region. And we also have some strawberries as well, and even some turf and vegetables in the southernmost parts of the district. So it's pretty varied.
Mm-hmm. And also a member of the House Agriculture Committee. For you, why is that committee both important for you and important for your district?
Well, it means jobs. We have thousands of people who work in the agriculture industry in District 9, but we also have a lot of people who work indirectly. They may work at the feed stores, or they may work in transportation, or they may be staffing agencies. There's just so many different industries and small businesses that rely on our large cattle and citrus production. So that's obviously critical, and I'm able to help them by serving on the Ag Committee. One of the biggest challenges right now is that citrus greening is decimating our Florida orange groves. We are down about 70% from peak production over a decade ago. And this year, Hurricane Irma only exacerbated that. We'll have a 50% crop loss this year. And unfortunately, this will be the first time in American history in decades that we will have more orange juice that's developed from areas outside of the country. Usually a majority of the orange juice is grown in Florida. Now, I believe we'll rebound, but that's one of the big issues that we're working on. And then for cattle, there's a real push to have a vaccine bank. The herds are good and they're getting bigger, but we always have to make sure that we're ready just in case you have any incoming viruses or other diseases. We averted a big one in the Keys when key deer got infected by screwworm a little over a year ago. We were able to contain that. No livestock was affected. We isolated and stopped the spread of the screwworm, but it just shows that even in our robust cattle industry that we have in Florida, there could always be threats, so we need to prepare for them.
You serve on, as we mentioned, agriculture, also serve on House Natural Resources. I'm wondering, kind of in the blending of those two committees, what are your priorities specifically relating to your committee work here in Washington?
Well, as you can see, the common ground is our land and our resources. And our farmers, our ranchers are some of the best stewards of the land. I've been at ranches where I've seen bald eagles fly overhead. I've seen the snail kite, which is one of our rare and endangered species, living in and around ranches. So we have a natural stewardship, and what I look for is balance. You know, our ranchers and our citrus growers, I mentioned their priorities about citrus greening and about the virus bank that they need, but we also can bring together conservationists who are concerned about making sure that we restore the Kissimmee River, which is it's a billion-dollar project that's in our district that cleans water going into the Everglades. And so Right now we're working on a bill that would create a wild and scenic designation for that river, and we're working with all different communities on that. In addition, we are looking to help compensate our ranchers in South Florida who are providing a lot of the Florida panther habitat. Another example of our ranchers being great stewards. But these panthers, they've run out of the hogs, they've run out of other critters and are eating some of the cattle, and so we have a compensation program. So you see this intersectionality and these different compromises that I get involved in to make sure that we in Florida can treat the land now sustainably and in the future, so that we could have a strong ag industry. We can continue our strong conservationist reputation and legacy in Florida, and that is a really unique and honored place that I get to work in.
Looking more broadly than specifically your committee work, and more broadly to the entirety of what is covered by the legislative branch here in Washington, here in Congress, what was it? What were the big priority issues for you when you were deciding whether or not you wanted to run for Congress?
Well, they overlap with my committee assignments, and that's why I chose them. One is jobs. Obviously, we talked about the ag portion of it, but we have a growing high-tech sector in Central Florida, and obviously a world-famous tourism sector. So I've done my best to protect tourism by protecting our beaches against offshore oil drilling and being able to restore them, to protect our rivers and lakes, to make sure that it's a place people want to go. In addition, we've worked together to boost the busiest spaceport in the world, Cape Canaveral, which is 20 miles out of my district, by making sure to pass amendments to make sure NASA has a lot to do to get us to Mars eventually, and the funding to do it. We have biotech in my district at Lake Nona, which is developing obesity, anti-obesity medicines, as well as looking at tropical diseases. We also have in Central Florida our growing simulation industry that makes most of the training programs for the military, and then sensors. So a lot of my goal has been to boost these sectors, because our biggest two issues in the district are higher paying jobs and then affordable housing. And right now we're working on the affordable housing front, because with Hurricane Maria, we had over 200,000 of my fellow Puerto Ricans arrived in Florida. So we were already stressing beforehand, and now we're fighting even harder to make sure that you have more apartments, more Section 8 housing, more workforce housing in Central Florida, so that everybody who can get a job easily in Central Florida can also find a good place to live for their families.
Looking at you specifically, in the grand scheme of Congress, you're relatively young in terms of the ages of some of your fellow members. Do you think that gives you a different perspective here in Washington?
Well, certainly being sort of in between being a millennial and a Gen Xer, I know how to use electronic devices and social media probably more appropriately and better than some of my peers. But I can tell you it's an important perspective for our Democratic caucus. I'm one of only two people under 40 who sit in our steering and policy committee, and I constantly remind people we need to communicate via social media, we need to communicate via Pandora and iHeartRadio. We need to understand that young people are facing huge debts for student loans and are going into a job market that they're not so certain about. So those things definitely help out, but when you're younger around here, you have a lot to prove. Once you have proven your mettle, then it can actually be an offensive asset. So having served 10 years in the Florida legislature, both in the Florida House and in the Florida Senate, I came in with a lot of experience for someone in my 30s, but there's still a lot to be proven here. And so I do that by showing up to all the committee meetings, doing my best to pass bills and work across the aisle when there are common ground issues, and make sure to every day put in an honest day's work here for my constituents.
What has surprised you most about being a member of Congress?
That you can still get things done even though it seems like everybody fights like cats and dogs up here. There's obviously big issues that are litigiously, vigorously debated, like health care and tax reform, for instance. But we have all these different bills that we work on in a bipartisan fashion. Citrus greening, I've already mentioned. We are on several letters and several bills dealing with that. When we had hurricane issues in Central Florida, we got together in a bipartisan coalition to make sure we got the individual designation of assistance so our constituents can make FEMA claims. We worked on everything from tackling invasive species to working on opportunities for space flight, to working on conservation issues. A bill that just got passed that was sponsored by Congressman Curbelo and I made sure that foreign offshore oil drillers were held to the same liability as domestic ones. Before they were capped at only $1 billion. In the first day of the BP oil spill, Florida lost billions. So we need to be very careful about our environment because it's important to our quality of life, important to business, important to our future. And so you can get things done. We've brought down grants for airports and for firefighters and police and others in the district, and have been able to move some bills along as well, dealing with hurricanes and dealing with protecting some of our rivers like the Kissimmee River. So that was the biggest surprise. I worried that whether you could get things done, and if you treat people with respect, you take ideas from both sides of the aisle, it can be done.
And let's finish up here by talking about one of the real important issues with you specifically, established guitar player, from what I understand.
So I'm part of a band called Orange Creek Riders. I've played music all my life, bands in high school and college and law school and afterwards. In fact, when I arrived in Florida back in 2001, I thought I'd practice law, play music, and get involved in art, and only kind of through building my business, I ended up getting into politics. Our inspirations are the cattle and cowboy history in Central Florida, although we'd call them cowmen in Central Florida, very different, and the citrus industry, and just that rural background. So a lot of our songs highlight that culture. So it's nice to be able to play and show that we're not all just political robots up here. We have interests that make us all unique, from athletics to history to stamp collecting to sports, being a fan or playing music and the like. So I try to keep up a few hobbies here and there, including playing music, my favorite one.
Mm-hmm. Are you a man of many guitars, or do you operate with just one instrument?
My preference is acoustic, because we have a harmonica player, bassist, drummer, and I play more rhythm and write songs and do vocals, and then I don't want to get in the way of our harmonica player, who's the true lead in our band.
And I know the ranking member on the House Agriculture Committee, Mr. Peterson, he has a band as well. Have you considered collaborating with him at all?
We have a little. Peterson's on a whole nother level, though. He made a living playing in bands. We've jammed a couple times. I'll play bass when I play with Mr. Peterson, but he does more of the big rock band stuff, and we're more of a folk rock, a smaller, intimate sound, and he's got the big rock and roll sound. So I've gotten to see him play a couple times, and it's encouraged me that we have a rock tradition in the Ag Committee.
Congressman Darren Soto from Florida's 9th District, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.